So good evening to everyone who has joined us on the live stream. I'm Lily and I'm the co-president of Model Westminster.
Hi everyone, I'm George. I hope you're having a good start to term 2. I'm one of Model Westminster's event managers.
And one of our aims this year has been to facilitate conversation around mental health. So we're very excited to be joined this evening by the Shadow Minister of Mental Health, Dr Rosena Allin-Khan. I'm just going to give you a brief sort of overview of how Rosena has come to politics, but no doubt I won't do it justice because it is a very, very interesting story. But after a few trials and tribulations, Rosena managed to overcome the odds and get a place at Cambridge Medical School, a testament to her determination and tenacity, which has kind of come through in her role in politics as well. After this, she went on to study a master's and has spent time working as a doctor in refugee camps and war zones. Since becoming the MP for Tooting in 2016, she's made a name for herself by speaking honestly and openly about what she believes in. Dr Rosena has continued to work as a doctor in St George's Hospital throughout the pandemic. Being both a politician and a practicing medic offers a unique insight at any time, but particularly during a pandemic. Tonight, the focus of the conversation will be on COVID and its impact on mental health. Rosena, thank you so much for joining us. You're clearly incredibly busy. How are you?
Oh, I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honoured to be with you tonight. And obviously, I wish it could be in person, but I have been literally looking forward to this event since it was put in my diary. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else other than right here, right now with you. And yeah, I'm well. I am a bit knackered, obviously, because as you just described, I'm doing a number of roles. I'm working a lot on the front line. I am also trying to to hold the government to account, also trying to do sort of media interventions and think about policy, all while trying to homeschool 2 very young children, which isn't going that well. But hey, we can't be great at everything. Thank you for asking.
Sounds like an awful lot. So Lily's just touched upon your rather abnormal career path and your rise to prominence within the Labour Party. Perhaps you could tell us what it is that led you into first medicine and then politics, and perhaps what I mean by this is the way those two, your interest links those two professions, because while they may seem quite incongruous together, especially in terms of the type of people we associate with medicine and politics, I suppose they both revolve around, or at least should revolve around, public well-being.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it all really kind of happened by accident, not the medical role, but the political role. But I think both of those professions were born out of real lived experiences. And for me, I don't ever remember not wanting to be a doctor. And we have no doctors in the family. We don't come from a long line of doctors. I just knew very early on that our life was unfortunately not normal with regards to, we didn't have access to things that other people had. I had 2 parents that were immigrants, and then my mum ended up raising us on her own, and life was really difficult. And I remember, I think, really thinking that now, like when I look back, because everyone always asks that question, why politics? I think it's just that really early sense of sort of injustice, but it was more framed around me saying to my mum, like, why is life so hard for us? Like, why do we get so much racism? Why do we not have enough money for the bills? Why do we have to like worry about what we buy in the supermarket to eat? And she always sort of said, look, Rosena, doesn't matter how hard we have it, although it feels awful, there are always people in the world that have it harder than we do. So really early on, I was determined that I wanted to help people. I kind of made it my mission. And so I decided for me that the best way to do that was medicine, because that's where I was going to meet the kids like me who needed to be heard and needed services to step in at a time when we would have needed services and they weren't there for us. And so I kind of was determined to go and do medicine. And then I failed all my A levels because at that time it wasn't modular. You showed up on the day and I didn't show up on the day to some of them. And so obviously things were tricky. And so I was kind of labelled this like mixed race working class failure at age 18 with no prospects. And I was like, well, what do I do with this? But I was so determined to sort of see out my dream of becoming a doctor that I carried on just sort of working. Like I resat my A levels, and I went and did a degree in in biochemistry, well, actually in medical biochemistry, because it had the word medical in it. And I thought, right, what do I need to do to try and get into medical school? All the things you think about then. But then, like, in amongst all of that, we got a Labour government, and the Labour government at that time made it easier for people from backgrounds like mine without money to go to medical school. And I was always made to feel that regardless of my grades, I was never going to get in anyway, just because it was too expensive. So against all odds, I made it into Cambridge. Really weird to think about that now. Like, I got in at 23 and started at 24, and then sort of journeyed on this path and was really able to really sort of fulfill my ambition of helping people. And I specialized in emergency medicine, but then I thought people that really need our help are abroad, and so I then did a master's in public health, specializing in emergency humanitarian assistance and stuff. And I went abroad and worked in war zones and natural disasters, and realised that we don't value human life the same way around the world. But then I came back to a Tory government and realised we didn't value life the same way here either. And look, I don't mind how anybody votes that's watching this. I'm obviously a Labour politician, and I'm sure you will have some really good Conservative politicians that you liaise with. But for me, it was a Labour government that changed my life, and a Tory government that helped me to understand the difference between having a Labour government and a Tory government by what I was seeing unfolding in the A&E when I was doing my shifts. And I decided I wanted to become a local councillor when I was on maternity leave of my first baby, because I just thought it's just a nice way to give back locally. And I won the solid Tory seat by 16 votes after 3 recounts, just by having honest conversations on the doorstep and just saying, hi, I'm Rosena, I live local, I don't mind if you vote UKIP, but I'll genuinely stand up for you. And just won my seat like that, really, as a local councillor, completely unexpectedly. And then Sadiq Khan became the mayor of London maybe about 18 months later, well, definitely under 2 years. And people told me to throw my hat in the ring, saying, you and your big goal were probably the only chance we've got of keeping Tooting Labour, because it had almost gone to the Tories last time. So I thought, right, well, why not go for it? I never thought I'd get it, because obviously all of the insecurities that you have from your childhood and your adolescent years, being made to feel you're not good enough. I just thought, why would anybody vote for me? But I'm straight talking. Somehow I just got from the next bit to the next bit to the next bit, and my community elected me. And it's just been the greatest honour of my life. But I think you should never forget where you come from and what really fuels you. So I love still working shifts in my A&E. I love doing the humanitarian medicine. Still, I do lots of it. And I use those experiences and people's real lived experiences to kind of campaign for people to have better opportunities and a better life.
I think for me, what underpins a lot of what you've done and also your success is this drive to give a voice to people who don't have a voice, or their voice isn't heard. Being an advocate, which I think is a term you've used to sort of describe what you wanted to do in your life before you realised that might lead to politics.
Exactly.
And you saw that, I think it was yesterday, you actually spoke about how the government has made NHS staff feel, not just throughout the pandemic, but also through the budget cuts which have been going on for years now, and just the general mismanagement and mistreatment of the NHS. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the experience of working in a hospital during the pandemic.
It's been deeply upsetting, if I'm honest, because I've seen a lot of death over the years. I've seen a lot of horrible, difficult things in A&E. I've seen a lot of death internationally. I've seen genocide. But for me, what was so hard about this is that it was all so avoidable. The number of deaths amongst healthcare workers, the number of deaths in our communities, it was avoidable. And politicians will always say, we're on the other side, they will always say, well, it was a pandemic, nobody could have foreseen this. But we are outliers. Look at us compared to so many other countries in Europe. I mean, we have just a huge death toll. And for me, it was so difficult knowing it could have been avoided, and going to work fearful every day, first of all, because you didn't have PPE. Now, because frontline workers still don't have the vaccine, many of them. And so feeling as though, you're breaking the hearts of families, deep down knowing that you genuinely feel it could have been avoided if people had gone into lockdown sooner, they'd rolled out mass testing, people had PPE. And so that, I think, is what's been the hardest. I don't mind feeling tired, because I'm used to that in my life. It's just, I think I'll sleep when I'm dead, really. But it's that gut-wrenching sense that when you're telling somebody the very worst of news about the person they love the most in the world, that could have been avoided. You didn't have to have that conversation, and it was a set of political choices that led to that conversation. And I found that mentally very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was in June of last year. So the first spike that they were saying more NHS, 3 times more NHS staff were taking time off for their mental health
Yes.
than were being forced to take time off because either they were shielding or isolating.
Yes.
And I assume right now that figure probably is worse because of the amount of cases we have. If we see the cases dropping and the nation progressing in the future, do you think there'll be a sort of a hangover, a mental health hangover of sorts from the accumulated stress and trauma endured particularly by our healthcare workers?
Without a doubt, we have healthcare workers with, post-traumatic stress disorder that, if it's not treated in a timely way, will have ramifications for them for the rest of their lives, some of them. And we have an exhausted workforce. And my point yesterday, in my health question, I think that you just referred to, is that we've got to remember that this pandemic arrived at a point where our NHS had been grossly under-resourced, both in terms of a workforce and like resources, like financial resources, services, for a decade. There was no slack in the system. We already had an NHS that was at crisis point.
Do you think that there needs to be something more similar to what we have our veterans get? So people who've come out of the army, they've been to a war zone, and I assume maybe some of the treatment you would have had after going to refugee camps and war zones, the programs that are in place for those people. Do you think that it's that level of treatment that we need to go through for doctors and medics, or actually you wouldn't even need to be a medic, just anyone who's been working in a hospital throughout this pandemic, particularly the ones in London or those areas which have been sort of most hard hit?
Well, yes, but just to say, I've never had any psychological support for any of the work that I've done, and I think that sort of highlights. In fact, after the first wave of the pandemic, I've set up the mental health support mechanism in place for one of the NGOs that I work with, because I realized there just aren't any. I just had to find my own ways to deal with things or cope with things, and sometimes it would involve me just wanting to sleep all of the time and just giving myself what I needed in terms of that, or writing or crying or doing whatever I needed to do. But I launched something called the Care for Carers package back in June, with an understanding that frontline workers, whether you are a hospital porter, a doctor, a nurse, a radiographer, like working in our care sector, you would have seen and been exposed to some really difficult things that will stay with you forever. And the government just refused to meet with me to talk about it, which is deeply frustrating, but I have to keep trying. But yes, there is definite specialist support that is required and should be in place in the same way as it is for veterans. Look, anybody that struggles with their mental health should have access to gold standard first class care, because if we don't invest in people, what are we good for as a government, as a nation, if we don't invest in people's mental health? And that includes students. What are we doing to our communities? We are doing them a disservice. We are robbing them of an opportunity to fulfill their potential and have productive, happy lives.
I think you just sort of touched on it with students there. As students, we're obviously very aware that we're not necessarily the hardest hit group, but also there is an intersection. Students aren't just one sort of homogenous group, which I think is how a lot of our peers have felt they've been treated. We had students from Exeter who graduated early to from like medical studies to go and help within the pandemic, and then on the flip side, we're being blamed for this rise in cases, and it seems ridiculous, because there is just much more to being a student than just you go and study and you have this sort of life to go home to. Some people, their house at university is their house, they don't have somewhere else to go. I think just generally being treated like just as one group has been what's caused a lot of resentment. but not just sort of university students. Then you've also got students at school who are having a lack of education in those maybe more critical years. And as we've just seen, that sort of had rise on Twitter, photos of the free school meals which students are getting, which are fundamentally not okay. There's not enough food in them, and it's not what the government paid for or was promised by these suppliers. It's probably going to take some time for the impact of all of these things to come out, especially in those earlier years of education. How do you think we can tailor our policies on mental health to account for this next generation? Some of us whom will be coming into the workplace fairly soon, but some who may not be coming into workplace for many more years and will be dealing with the ramifications of COVID for a lot longer.
Well, great question. I think it's really worth noting that I've always said that students, I think, have been some of the hardest hit throughout this whole pandemic for a whole host of reasons. First of all, you have students who have the whole exam fiasco. Then you have students who went off to start their new life as a fresher and found themselves trapped in halls of residence with accommodation officers telling them they had to stay put and they weren't allowed to leave the building. And they were getting food deliveries and some of them weren't showing up, and they were with people they didn't even know and forced to self-isolate. And then they turn on the TV and then they hear they're being blamed for this second wave, which is just rubbish. And so I think students have had a really very, very difficult time. And then you have students who are graduating into what is the deepest recession we've had in 100 years. So it's incredibly difficult for young people, students and young people that are not students as well, because anyone trying to enter the workforce now is having a very difficult time. And I think it's about acknowledging that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Different groups of young people need different things, and you're absolutely right. For so many students, their student accommodation is just that. It's their student. It's their home, isn't it? But then I remember having to work my socks off doing all sorts of jobs, like just trying to earn money to pay for my rent. And what about all those students who are expected to study, expected to concentrate, knowing that they can't go out and earn for what they hope is going to pay for their fees or their accommodation? So what I said when we did an intervention around September time was that it's about, like, we need a plan from the government as to what their joined up strategy is going to be to support universities and to work in hand with local NHS trusts. Because if you live in Birmingham and you go to university in Exeter, your doctor's in Birmingham, everyone that knows you's in Birmingham, but you need support in Exeter if you're in your halls of residence and not allowed to go somewhere. So it involves joined up thinking, and I think putting young people at the heart of it as well. I don't think you want a load of politicians saying, well, this is what we think you need, this is what we're going to do. You have to be part of the conversation. It's for us to say, well, do you know what, Lily? You know what, George? What do you need? What do you want? And asking that of enough young people so that we can get it right for you.
I think you're definitely right on touching on the trying to involve students in the process. Just a few days ago, there's a campaign going on from the Russell Group universities to try and get some sort of grade system that will support us given the effects of the recent lockdown. And the word from the sort of organising body of Russell Group University said that they don't see that there has been any major impact on students' abilities to study and learn in these times. Therefore, there's not a need to change the grading system, which I think anyone who knows a student or has, can even just try to imagine what students are going through right now, particularly those students who aren't necessarily the sort of typical Russell Group University students. It's a lot. So I think that response from them has not been taken particularly well. And there's various campaigns going on to try and get them to change their mind. And our Students Guild has been very supportive of that.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, it boggles the mind that they think that, doesn't it?
It's just shows quite how out of touch they potentially are. But it's not just the younger generations who are being affected, whose mental health is being affected, and maybe a lot or too much focus is on younger people. I think George has a question about sort of the elderly mental health.
I was doing some research, and I read a stat saying that about 40% of elderly people suffered from depression before the pandemic. And I mean, I was shocked, didn't know if that was true for a start. And it made me think perhaps the wider public, and particularly people of my age, are we relatively incognizant to the severity of mental health issues within this higher age demographic and the way they're being affected at the moment?
That's really interesting. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think that often, and I think we're all guilty of this, isn't it, when we're younger, that the older people, it just seems like a time in our lives that we just really can't relate to, because it seems so far away from where we are now in our lives. But like our elderly communities suffer terribly with loneliness. And I've done quite a lot of work with various people in the NGO sector on this. And now more than ever, it's so important that we consider our communities. And, you know, I think of course people aren't cognizant in the way that we probably should be, because that's natural. You know, like in the same way as I'm sure a lot of older people may not be thinking about students anymore, because we it's natural. It's not a blame game. It's just normal that we think about our own immediate environment. But I do think there are so many community projects that have come out of this COVID pandemic. You know, there's been a lot of terrible things have happened, but some really good things have come out. And I think if you know that stat, and if you are aware of the issues facing some of our older people, there are initiatives that you could put in place, like, you know, like a buddying system with someone, you know, more elderly, or like get in touch with your local Age UK or your Alzheimer's groups, and just think to yourself, is there anything that we could do as a collective, understanding how it feels to struggle, but knowing there are other groups struggling in different ways? Is there anything we can do to help them? And I think one thing that COVID has sort of laid bare in our society is that those that have money and resources, they'll do fine out of this, because at the end of the day, you're locked down, you've got a great big garden, go run around in it, your 5 kids can go run around in it, and you will get nice Ocado deliveries to your house, and, you know, just like hunker down for a while, everything will be fine. But that isn't the reality for most people. It's like most people really, really struggle. And I think this pandemic has laid bare the stark inequalities that exist. And unfortunately, you know, the elderly do really, really suffer with feeling very isolated. And that's something that has really come out of all the work that I've done talking to local community groups. And, you know, think about it. If your only weekly outing is to the local coffee morning at your church, which is where you'll be meeting other people, you know, also so many elderly people are separated from their loved ones in care homes and not allowed to visit. Imagine you've been married for 45 years to the love of your life and you haven't been able to see them since March. What's that going to do to your mental health? So yeah, I think that I don't think there's a single group of people that haven't suffered in some way with their mental health throughout this pandemic.
I think what you touched on there really is so true, that about this is showing those inequalities more than I think we've ever been able to see them before. And not only showing the inequalities, but also showing lots of people who don't necessarily or haven't recognized that those inequalities are there, or haven't realized quite how lucky they are, and maybe the disconnect between some people in positions of power and some of the leaders in this country who maybe aren't recognizing just what reality is for some people. And that kind of draws onto one of the questions we got from an audience, which were pre-submitted. Generally speaking, do you find that there is a significant gap in understanding of mental health between your work in politics and your work as a doctor? That's to say, do you think there are two spheres of work have fundamentally different ideas about how it should be dealt with and what mental health policy should look like?
What a great question. Actually, no. I think intuitively one would say, well, you know, medics have a good understanding of what's needed. And I do think as an ED doctor, like an A&E doctor, you are well placed to sort of see the things that are coming in and understand. But what I have found is the common theme, whether someone's a politician, whether they're a doctor, whatever their profession or their role is, I found that there is a direct correlation between whether they themselves or someone close to them has suffered with mental ill health. So there's a direct correlation between that and their willingness to understand and engage with the issue. So you could work in a hospital in a department and suffer with depression and have a very ununderstanding boss, and I think, unfortunately, where we are with the current government, I don't believe they really get it. Whereas Theresa May, for all of her faults, she had, I think, a goddaughter who tried to take her own life, and so she really wanted to put mental health on the agenda. And so today, I've just come back from Westminster, responding to the minister on the white paper, like the Mental Health Reform Act white paper, because she instigated that in 2016. Okay, it's taken really a long time, but because she had it on her radar, she wanted to raise it, and it hasn't been done since 1983, so it's clearly needed long before then. So I think, generally speaking, it is somebody's direct understanding of what it's like to suffer or have someone they love suffer with mental ill health that drives their willingness to engage and their level of understanding.
Yeah, talking about the Mental Health Act reform bill that was put forward this morning, I think. What was your initial reaction to that? Because I think it was centering on racial disparities in mental health service and patient autonomy as well. But what's your first reaction to that?
So, of course, mental health mustn't be a political football. And there are times when we welcome things and there are times when we challenge things. And it's so welcome that we now have, we do have the white paper, and albeit it's taken a really long time. So my role today was to focus the government's attention on a few key issues that we can't ignore. Firstly, it's how do we resource this in the first place? You can say what you like. It's only warm words if you don't have the workforce to deliver what you're trying to achieve. But it's also about saying, this isn't just about mental health legislation. This is about addressing the underlying inequalities that exist within our society that create a mentally more unwell society. So if you live in insecure accommodation, if you are Black, if you are from a BAME background, if you don't have access to education in the same way as others, if you're digitally poor, all of these things are drivers and well-known drivers of mental ill health later on in life. And so if we know this, there's no point just trying to fix up here if you don't get to the root cause of what is happening early on in people's lives and about addressing those health inequalities. And they are stark. And so I wanted my response to be centered around, hold on a minute, we know that these inequalities exist. What are you doing about that? While welcoming the fact that, we're having it, but also saying that the whole kind of advocacy point is really, really important, and feeling as though you can challenge decisions that are being made about your care, feeling that you can, expect some serious answers as to why you're having the treatment that you're having. If you're not able to advocate for yourself, that you can nominate someone that you trust. Things like that.
It will be really interesting to see how that progresses. I know that's sort of just in the start of the process of reviewing that reform, but it will be very interesting to see how it progresses. And hopefully, I mean, it's quite crazy to think it's been, I think, 40 years since that was passed. I mean, that can't be right, especially given the area of mental health is one which, even now, we're seeing, such quick progress in our understanding and our sort of treatment of it, because previously it's been so poorly understood. Sort of moving on the conversation slightly, but to sort of circle back to your own experiences. I was wondering how you've sort of managed during the pandemic as a doctor and an MP, and just as a person in your everyday life, as a mother as well. I know as an MP, it's common to come under a lot of scrutiny, and you've spoken about that a bit. But I was just wondering what kind of things you do to tackle and deal with that and get through those probably harder times.
Thank you. Gosh, well, it's been a bit of a work in progress. I think I'm much better at it now than I would have been sort of say in June. And I would say that the first most important thing is go easy on yourself if you're having a difficult day. Just accept it, own it. Today doesn't feel like a good day, but that's okay, because tomorrow will feel better, and I'm going easy on myself. That the fact today I might feel sad, or today I might feel just pissed off that I can't see my friends. Today I might feel as though I'm a terrible mother because I haven't been able to homeschool and go on all the Zoom calls and go and do my shift. It's okay not to feel okay. Tomorrow is a new day. And just taking the pressure off myself sometimes has been really good. Also, I cannot promote enough the power of exercise. And whether you're just going out for a walk for 5 minutes or running 5K, which I like to do now. I hate running. I'm really sporty. Like, I play all sorts of sports, but I used to find running really, really boring. But I was like, we can't go out and do anything. And I know how much I need to exercise in order to get the blood flowing, get the endorphins going. So I forced myself to run to the point that I actually quite enjoyed it. And now I try and run 3 times a week when time permits. Not this week, but I try and just do like 5Ks when I can, because for me, getting out of the house, getting out of my zone, and just seeing something else that's like not Twitter, not my laptop, not the news, has been really, really good for me. Also, having really honest conversations with my mates, picking up the phone and going, "Hey babes, how's your day? It's rubbish. Oh, so is mine." You realize if you're just honest with your friends, you're all pretty much going through the same thing. So reaching out, exercise, going easy on yourself, and trying to, one of the big tips I've got is, if you can, where possible, change the environment where you do your work versus where you relax. So if you live in a shared house, for example, if you can, try not to do all your work in your bedroom and then relax in your bedroom. Try and make your workplace and your relaxing space different. If you can't, because you live in halls of residence and you want to create structure in your day, which is really, really important for mental health, really important. When you're working, put different clothes on. And then when you're relaxing, change out of those clothes into like slouchy stuff. Rather than this thing, because we were all guilty of it. I know I was. You kind of take off your same favorite jumper, leave it by the bed, put your pajamas on, get up the next day, put your same favorite jumper on, and continue. Just repeat until the jumper wants to wash itself. And just trying to demarcate what's studying and working time and what's relaxing time is so good for the brain. And if you lack complete structure in your day, just saying, right, I'm going to set my alarm for this time, and I'm going to go out for a walk, and I'm going to go and get my coffee if the coffee shop's open, or I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm going to wave at somebody and smile at them, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to do that this time every day. That structure is really, really key. But fundamentally, right, there is no one out there, unless they live, in that really great big house with a massive garden and don't have to worry about homeschooling and get Ocado deliveries. Unless you're that person, you are having a difficult time right now. Everybody's in it together, and that's okay. But I will end this bit on an up note. I always try and think of all the fun things I'm going to do when we're out of this. And so I've had friends that I've planned about 5 girls' weekends that I'm never going to get 5 in when this pandemic's over. But in my head, right, we are going to Ibiza, we're going to go to Marrakesh, we're going to go on a walking holiday and climb Mount Snowdon. I plan all these things because I know that one day I'm going to be able to do it. So having hope and planning things is really, really important, whether that be with your family, with your friends, because we will come out of this.
I think that leads us on quite nicely to the next sort of question, which George has got, which is looking forward and looking to the vaccine, which is sort of the rollout process has started. So George, I'll let you take that
Yeah, I was
question.
just going to ask you, because obviously you'll know more than most on this, as to whether the government are aggrandizing the success of the rollout so far. Are you as positive as they are about it being rolled out looking forwards?
In an answer, no. I think unless they really move to 24/7 rollout, we will see people catching COVID again who've had their first vaccination and have had to wait. So we've already seen the case of an A&E nurse who had their first dose of the jab. The second one was delayed and they've caught COVID, so can't go to work. I welcome the vaccine, I must say. I welcome the vaccine. I think it's brilliant that we have it, but I think there's no time to waste. Every 90 seconds, someone's dying of COVID. And I mean, like I put it on social media the other day that I think it needs to be 24/7, and like over 30,000 people agreed with me on there, because, you know, obviously there's some people saying, oh, do you want old people to go? No, I don't want old people to go anywhere in the middle of the night. They can have it during the day. But don't you think, like, if you knew that we could be safe, or if our NHS workers could be safe and our carers could be safe, and we could have our freedoms returned again, wouldn't you go and get the vaccine at 2 o'clock in the morning? You'd get a lift, you'd get a bunch of mates, and off you'd go and you'd have it, you know, and you'd be safer in order to make other people safer. And I just don't think we can wait until autumn for everyone to be vaccinated. I just think we cannot allow any option for there to be, we vaccinate the vulnerable, everybody else has to fend for themselves because they're probably going to live. We have to understand that long COVID is an issue. I have a debate on long COVID tomorrow. Like, long COVID is an issue. It is debilitating. It affects young people as well. And so I just think the government needs to pull out all the stops and do a trial of 24/7. You know, if they're worried that people that like there won't be uptake, don't decide for us. Let us decide. Let you know. Why don't you come and see if we will come at 2 o'clock in the morning? Because if you are on a shift and you do a 5 to 2 shift, which is quite common practice in A&E or as a carer or as a nurse, you know, you've got the choice between going home and like risking having COVID, or going and getting a vaccine. I'm getting on the damn bus. I'm going to get my vaccine.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we'd all agree with you.
We'd be there at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're very aware that you are not at the end of your day. You've still got things to be going on with. So we're
I'm really
just going to wrap this
up.
Thank you very much. It's been so great to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back virtually or maybe in person at some point in the future.
I'd love that.
But just to wrap up the conversation and try and finish on a high, hopeful note. Obviously, you told us about your 5 girls' weekends, which you're looking forward to, which I very much hope you are able to get in at some point.
In my life, maybe.
But more in terms of the short term, is there something which you think that we can look forward to? Maybe it's getting this 24/7 vaccines passed, or maybe it's the vaccine in itself that is giving you hope, and you think can give us as a sort of a nation, a student population, hope for the next few months, which are undoubtedly going to be slightly challenging.
Yeah, well, just know you have people fighting your corner is the first thing. You know, just know that when we're sitting in shadow cabinet meetings, or I'm talking to my health team or the education team, we are talking about you. We are fighting for you with you in mind. So your voices and the things that you're saying today and the things that you're bringing in today, they go somewhere, and it matters, and you matter. So firstly, just know that you have people fighting your corner. But secondly, you know, we do have the vaccine now, and that will be really good news as long as it's rolled out properly. And my understanding is that the government have U-turned and are going to look at providing the vaccine 24/7. And ultimately, this will end. This will end, and we will be able to go back to hugging and parties and meals out with mates and how things were before. We will. Obviously, the world has changed in many ways, but hopefully, in many ways, like for the better as well in many ways. We understand the power of staying connected in a more digital way as well. We understand that all the inequalities of which we spoke have been laid bare, and hopefully serve as a stark reminder to everybody that they need addressing. There's no hiding from it. And I think it's also helped some people become kinder to others and really, be very selfless. There are a lot of people who've been incredibly selfless, and even George yourself, just looking into what it's like for older people at the moment and finding that out. That's something that you might not have thought of doing before this. And I think it's caused us to not just think about ourselves. Every time we put a mask on, we're protecting others, not just ourselves. And I hope that is also something that we've taken from this pandemic. It's what can we do for our neighbour as well as ourselves? And if everybody starts thinking that way, we can start to change society as a whole, I think.
I think that's definitely a very positive note to end on, and very true. And I've heard that, from family and friends and the student population as well. There has been a change, and people are looking out for each other more, which is nice to see, and hopefully will be taken forwards. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real privilege to talk to you, especially given the circumstances and given how much you're doing right now.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Honestly, the privilege is all mine.
Thank you very much. So thank you to everyone who's been watching us on Facebook as well. I'm going to stop the live stream now.